For clarity during this time of year, as I hear different comments about the season, the commercialization of the season, the religious nature of this season, as well as just in Christianity in general, as religious leaders discuss how to observe the season appropriately, and especially in hearing comments of a practicing Jew that I listen to from time to time on talk radio on his view of Christmas. He spoke to that this week on one of the days when I was driving. Actually, I heard him talk about this a couple of times, but he was talking about how even though he's a practicing Jew and does not necessarily espouse the religious aspect of this season, he talked about Christmas and its impact for good on American values, and even spoke to the degree of individuals who think that we should do away with anything that's religious, about how that's not good for our country and the direction that the country is going and all of this. But in thinking about all of that, for clarity, as I mentioned, I tend this time of year, I tend to find myself going back to Scripture and reviewing the accounts again of John the Baptist's birth, Elizabeth and Zacharias and Mary and Joseph and the angel coming and all of the details. As I'll hear this song here and they'll sing this or they'll say this, and is that what Scripture says? I want to go back and look at that. But how many do many of you find that you end up going back to Scripture during this time? I do. I like to just go through and read it clearly again to make sure that I'm understanding exactly what happened as we look at the events depicted during that time. So anyway, in doing so, I found myself studying Luke. Luke goes into a lot of detail about the early time of Christ, and so I read through that, but then I just kind of keep reading, and I kept reading this time, and came across a couple of Christ's, I wouldn't necessarily say they were his early teachings, but they came along fairly quickly a little bit later in the book of Luke. And I'd like to talk about two of those teachings that Christ gave today. Now, does it relate to this season and what we see around us? To some degree, but it's not the emphasis of my message today. But these two statements that Jesus Christ made jumped out at me in a manner in which they haven't before. So I'd like to talk with you about them today. I think, they're important in my life. I think they're important in your life. The title of the message is simply Two, T-W-O, Two Take Heeds for God's People Today. Two Take Heeds for God's People Today. Let's go to the first one as we begin this split sermon, and do so by turning to Luke 11. Yes, I got all the way to Luke 11. I actually read a little past Luke 11 in looking at some of these passages over the last 2 or 3 weeks. But Luke 11, we'll see one of them here mentioned first, that are for God's people today. Luke 11, verse 33. And what do we think of when we read this passage? What does it bring to mind? Luke 11, verse 33. No one, when he has lit a lamp, puts it in a secret place or under a basket, but on a lampstand, that those who come in may see the light. Now, when I read that, I was thinking, okay, I also, in studying these passages through Luke, I wanted to go to different accounts in the Gospels that parallel this. But so I thought, when I first read that, I thought immediately, what do you think of? Well, I always go to Matthew 5. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. You don't put it under a bushel, but it shines to everybody. The Matthew 5, 14 or so. I thought of that initially, but that's not the take heed part. We know that. We know we are to be lights. We know that we're to be lights to one another. And that's part of that unity of growing and strengthening as a church. We're to be lights to the world. But it's interesting what he goes on to say in Luke's account. Verse 34, the lamp of the body is the eye. The way it's illuminated, in a sense, is through the eye, where our eyes are going, what others see as they see us. But it's the lamp. It's what upon what we're focusing here. But he says the lamp of the body is the eye. Therefore, when your eye is good, when it's good, your whole body is also full of light. But when your eye is bad, your body is full of darkness. Take heed, therefore, take heed. I always, I think of take heed. What's he mean when he says take heed? It's kind of like that skit about the Arnold Schwarzenegger skit that says, listen to me now and hear me later. This is really important. Take heed to this. Think about this. What am I really saying here? This is very, very important. Verse 35, here's the first take heed. Therefore, take heed that the light which is in you is not darkness. That the light which is in you is not, in essence, is not in effect darkness. If then your whole body is full of light, having no part dark, well, the whole body will be full of light, as when the bright shining of a lamp gives you light. How can light be darkness? It's kind of an interesting concept that Christ would cover. How can we have light that is actually darkness? Those of us who understand God's truth understand this season. It involves light, the festival of lights. That is, in reality, darkness. It's darkness. We understand that. We get that. God has opened our minds to that precious truth. It's been one of the Mr. Hicks talked about the big three. Well, another one of that are on some of these holidays that we see, and we see the background to the holidays and how it is light, very bright and beautiful as we see that. I love to see all of the lights. I find it, well, some's a bit gaudy, but some of it's really, really pretty. But it is, in fact, a form of darkness. Most of us are very, very aware of this, but I'll read this small excerpt from Britannica.com. Why is Christmas in December? In the 3rd century, the Roman Empire, 3rd century AD, so the 200s AD, the Roman Empire, which at the time had not adopted Christianity, celebrated the rebirth of the unconquered sun, S-U-N, the Sol Invictus, on December 25th. The holiday not only marked the return of longer days after the winter solstice, but also followed the popular Roman festival called the Saturnalia, during which people feasted and exchanged gifts. It was also the birthday of the Indo-European deity Mithra, a god of light and loyalty, whose cult was at that time growing popular among Roman soldiers. The church in Rome began formally celebrating Christmas on December 25th in 336 during the reign of the Emperor Constantine. As Constantine had made Christianity the effective religion of the empire, some have speculated that choosing this date had the political motive of weakening the established pagan celebrations. The date was not widely accepted in the Eastern Empire, on the eastern side, the Constantinople side, where January 6th had been favored for another half century. Christmas did not become a major Christian festival until the 9th century AD. In the 3rd century, the Roman Empire, which at that time had not adopted Christianity, celebrated the rebirth of the unconquered sun on December 25th. We went through that. So they went into, I misread that. So coming back to the story, as Constantine had made Christianity the effective religion of the empire, some have speculated that choosing this date had the political motive of weakening these celebrations and of paganism, and the date that was widely accepted didn't fully come to be until, as we said, much, much later. So we read that, we think of that, we think of all that came when it did. And then we come, well, what does Scripture say about these kinds of things? How does God view that? Yes, it's shiny, it's bright, it's pretty, but is it in fact darkness? A passage to which we often turn is in Deuteronomy 12. I find this passage particularly interesting because I remember one situation years ago at summer camp, and someone had asked a question about the celebration of different holidays and such, and how should we handle that. And I remember an individual in the group standing up and just simply saying, well, that's explained in Deuteronomy 12. And so we all turned there, and he read it. And I thought, man, I did not remember. I knew that passage, but I didn't remember where it was. And this person out of the blue just read the passage. I thought that was pretty impressive. The interesting thing about that is that person now keeps Christmas. But again, it speaks to the understanding of a way of life that makes sense if we hold to it. Deuteronomy 12, verse 21, when the Lord your God cuts off from before you the nations which you go to dispossess, here they're coming into the land of Canaan, and you displace them and dwell in their land, take heed to yourself that you're not ensnared to follow them after they're destroyed from before you, and that you do not inquire after their gods, saying, well, how did these nations serve their gods? I'm going to do likewise. I'm going to go and do likewise. You shall not worship the eternal your God in that way. Don't do that, he's saying. For every abomination to the eternal which he hates, they have done to their gods. For they burn even their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. Whatever I command you, be careful to observe it. You shall not add to it or take away from it. The worship of Baal, the sun, the S-U-N, is very bright. It's very bright. And yet the worship of the sun is darkness. The sun god is darkness. But the lights, the joy, the good cheer, the giving that takes place. Jeremiah 10 spoke to that, these cultures that do these things. I reflect as well on the Bible story. I don't know how many of you have cracked open the Bible study by Mr. Basil Wolverton recently, but I was looking this week at the preface to one of the Bible story volumes and reading what Mr. Herbert Armstrong had stated about the Bible story and about what he had tasked Mr. Basil Wolverton with in doing that. And saying at the time that some were saying, well, we've got to do something or have something for our children to help them to learn God's way. So he tasked Basil Wolverton with the writing of this and to try to fill in some of the details, not to speculate, but to fill in some of what was going on. And it's interesting reading it. Mr. Armstrong spoke that he intended it to be written at around the 11 to 13 age level. He said, which was ideal, but he said not that a 5 or 6 year old with parents there involved in the teaching, that they couldn't understand that teaching. But it's just interesting as you read through the way that Mr. Wolverton presented the words of the Bible in the language that a child could understand, and to the degree that he talked about some of these various Canaanite practices that were there that they were coming in to dispossess. And at one point he even talks about very graphically, we just read this passage here of they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. And at one point, Mr. Wolverton talks about that in the building of some of their dwellings, they would sacrifice children and put them in the walls as a way of like not appeasing the god, but an offering to the gods that the gods would then protect their homes. And you just think, how dark and how off that is. But at the same time, we understand, God's people understand, these people's minds weren't open to the truth. They didn't have the truth. They didn't understand the truth, and they did these things. And someday these individuals' minds will be open as we understand through the plan of God. And what a wonderful time it will be to help them understand how the true God wants them to worship. But we see something like that took place back in that time, that God says, Don't try to find out how the different things are going on there. Don't do that. That is darkness. That is darkness. Don't go down that path. And at the same time, we see, I saw this week, December 12th, 2019, an abortion rights group offers a quote, "abortion is magical" candles that they're offering as holiday gifts, and in talking about that in super hip colors, hot pink, purple, sparkly gold. And again, I'm not stating that everybody who keeps Christmas or this or that ultimately is this sacrificing children. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag, what's out there. It's all part of Babylon, and there is light out there that is darkness. So as we think about that, and as we understand that, let's go to 2 Corinthians 4. We know the passage there, one of the common passages to which we turn in speaking of the role that Satan, the devil, plays in this world as their minds are blinded. But there's another passage another statement that just follows that in the latter part of 2 Corinthians 4:4 that speaks to us. You know, on a personal basis, in our own lives, the true light has shone upon us. The true light shines on us. We've experienced what the world is not, and we don't set ourselves, we're way up here because we get this and they don't. We're just humbled and deeply thankful that God has opened our mind to that. But in that, we do not take that lightly, or we do not take for granted that true light. 2 Corinthians 4, the part we always remember is verse 4, whose minds the God of this age has blinded. He has blinded them. That's what he's all about, who do not believe. But here's what it says, lest the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, the light of the gospel, the good news, the glad tidings of the glory of Christ, who he has been for all eternity, of his role that he played in the Old Testament, the role that he played in coming here and giving his life for all of mankind, so that through the plan of God, all of mankind can have an opportunity to live with God for eternity in the God family, in the family of God. All of that, the light of the gospel, that has shone to us, and it is very bright. This individual, Jesus Christ, who is the imprint of God, he is the image of God. He's saying, lest that should shine on them. That has shone upon us. We have been given that. It is a tremendous blessing. What an incredible light that we then, as a mirror, can mirror back out to the world, that we can mirror back to one another, as Mr. Hicks was talking about in the split sermon. In verse 18 of chapter 3, just right before that, it leads into this statement that he makes here in verse 4. But we all with unveiled face, we're there inside, in a sense, inside the temple with an unveiled face. We're beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord. We're being transformed. We're being changed. We're being metamorphosed into that same image, from glory to glory, from one degree of glory to another degree of glory, as we mirror that light more and more. That's what we've been given. It's such a contrast to the light that we see around us that is darkness. And it's done so, as it says here in verse 18, by the Spirit of the Lord. So the light of the gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, that has shone upon us. So does that mirror in our lives? Do we mirror that back? Because Jesus tells his followers, he says, take heed. That's you and me. He says that to you and me. Take heed that the light which is in us is not in darkness. That the light which is in us is not actually darkness. What about our worship? Mr. Hicks talked to some degree about just certain basic truths, as the rapture, the different things that are out there. There are different philosophies that are out there among the churches of God. Mr. Hicks did an excellent job of describing what we must do. There are many things out there that have an appearance of light. Everybody seems happy. We're all happy. It's great here and everything. But is it light? Is it a light that is really darkness? Brethren, we've got to study. We've got to study that. We've got to know that. We've got to deeply research things like that. We've got to get counsel in situations like that where we find ourselves. What is the true light? If we are not vigilant to discern between the two, the light that is really light or the light that is actually darkness, we're going to have some trouble. We're going to have some trouble. 2 Corinthians 11 speaks to that. We've read this on occasions before, and that's one of the things that I have just been deeply impressed with the congregations here and the degree of study that so many have in really trying to study and discern what is the truth, where is God leading his church, what is the right belief. Paul was taking the Corinthians to task for something that they weren't doing in this regard. I fear, verse 3, somehow as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, so that your minds may be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. It's not that complicated in some respects here. The simplicity that is in Christ. Verse 4, for if he who preaches another Jesus whom we have not preached, if you receive a different spirit which you have not received, or a different gospel which you've not accepted, he says you may well put up with it. That it was happening, that there was not that discernment. And we've talked about this, that it's going to continue to be talked about. The need to discern is going to be so critical as we move down through the end of the age, dealing with what we see going around us. Very, very confusing times for many out there. So, that said, on this whole thing of take heed that the light which is in us is not in darkness. Well, when we see it in others, in their worship, in doctrine, or in their behavior, what do we do? What do you do when you see that in another brother? What should we do? Are we willing to call it for what it is? We know what Christ said to Peter when Peter said, "No, you're not going to die. That's not going to happen. We're here. That's not going to happen." And he said, "Get behind me, Satan." Peter was diligent. Peter was really striving to do what was right. He was on fire for doing what was right, but he was deceived in that way. And Jesus Christ told him for what it was. You're off on this, Peter. In fact, do you realize, Peter, that is a satanic kind of way of thinking? How would that have hit him? How would that hit any of us if Christ said, "Get behind me, Satan"? We have to be so careful and so diligent to know what we believe, why we believe, and then again, how to deal with one another in these cases. Sometimes that's appropriate to say, "Listen, that's not the right path. That's not the right path. That is down the road of this." Sometimes the situation is simply get away from it. Get away from that. Walk in the light. Part of discernment is the discernment that God gives us through the Holy Spirit. To see things for what they truly are. Brethren, we don't minimize this. Don't minimize that the gift of the ability to discern as we study and understand God's way. Our spiritual senses are exercised, and God works with us through His Spirit to exercise that, to discern the good and the evil, and to help choose that way. We're going to wane in this ability as we neglect the armor of God. We're going to grow in this ability to discern as we tend to the armor of God. I won't do that today, but if you get a chance this week, take some time, read Ephesians 6 and say, okay, there's this, there's the breastplate of righteousness, there's the shield of faith, all these different ones. Well, how's my armor in this area? Are there some rusted out areas? Are there some areas that are deteriorating, that are not as oiled as well as they should be, and are shining and as in tip-top shape as they ought to be? That's how we discern that, and in a sense, again, make our light shine the way that it should. So what about in our lives? Are there any areas of darkness that shine in our lives? Let's turn, if you would, to Isaiah 1. Isaiah 1, we talked about one of the other basic understandings that the church has, the pagan aspects, the heathen cultures that have been brought into many of the holidays, the religious holidays that are in the area of worship here in America and throughout much of the Christian world. That's pretty foundational, isn't it? But we also know that as God looks down upon us and sees us keeping what we keep, that light can also be darkness to how God views, even in a sense, celebrating the things that God tells us to celebrate. Our light can still be darkness. As He says to the southern kingdom here, calling them Sodom and Gomorrah. Verse 10, chapter 1, Isaiah. Hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Give ear to the law of our God, you people of Gomorrah. That Sodom and Gomorrah were both destroyed many, many years ago. He's talking to the southern kingdom here. To what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices to me, says the Eternal? I've had enough of these burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fed cattle. I don't delight in the blood of bulls. I don't delight in the lamb offerings, the goat offerings. When you come before me, to appear before me, who's inquired this from your hand? Who's told you to do this? To trample my courts? Bring no futile, worthless, is what the margin renders. Don't bring any worthless sacrifices. Incense is an abomination. Well, wait a second. Incense, that was burning there right there in the area of worship, right there within the tabernacle and all of that. He says it's worthless. The new moons, the recognition of the offerings as they did on the new moon, the Sabbaths, the calling of assemblies. He says, I can't endure iniquity and the sacred meeting. I can't endure it. God's saying this. Your new moons and your appointed feasts, my soul hates. Now, some will say that when it says your new moons, that maybe it's a reference to the northern tribes of Jeroboam switching the feasts and everything, but I think more likely it's not applying solely to that. More of the thing of the Sabbaths, the feasts, all these things. God says, I hate that. I hate that. They're a trouble to me. I'm weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands, He says, I'm going to hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. And then we see what He says in verse 16 of why this kind of worship is good and right, of serving God. The Sabbaths, the appointed feast, in that day prior to Christ's sacrifice, the offerings, all of that, the incense, all of that was good and wonderful and right if verses 16 and 17 were in place. But when they're not, when they're not in place in our lives, then God hates it, even the right feasts. Verse 16, wash yourselves, make yourselves clean, put away the evil of your doings before my eyes. And again, the lamp of the eye, the lamp being the eye, And is it bright? Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Rebuke the oppressor. Defend the fatherless. Plead for the widow. That kind of thing. Then we come down to verse 19. If you're willing and obedient, then you shall eat the good of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you shall be devoured by the sword. As we think about that in our own lives, where are we? Where are we in that? Are there areas of darkness that shine in our lives, even though we're keeping these feasts, we're keeping the Sabbath, we're doing these things? God sees all. I'd like, if they could, to put up I've got a incredibly talented skill at PowerPoint, and this is my one PowerPoint picture. The only thing that's really frustrating with this picture is I needed to get it big enough, and you know what that causes to my width, when you do pictures. So I am like 1/3 the width of that. Just in real life, you can probably see that now. No, I am slightly wider than I normally am, but does anybody know what that is? That was at Cockington Estates when we were in England. We're walking around, and I came to this, and I had no idea what it was, but until I read the little sign. But it's a millstone. It's a millstone. And let's turn to Matthew 18. I've always read the thing about the millstone. If I had any technological skills, my next slide would have been a photoshopped noose around my neck with the string tied to the rope tied to the middle of that millstone. I've thought about taking that picture and putting that right up in front of my computer to remind me of that. Please, nobody do that to teach me a lesson. Let me take care of that in my own life. I appreciate that. But to get a visual of how God views why it is so critical for us to make sure that our light is that we take care and make sure that our light is not darkness. I think of that. I think of, well, I wonder if that was attached to my neck and I was on the edge of a ship, or I walked the plank, and then I got tossed in. I wonder how quickly I would sink. I have a high degree of body fat, which, they say body fat floats, but even with that, I don't think I would stay up very long before I sank to the bottom. This is how God views that. Right after he talks about how we deal with the little ones, Matthew 18, verse 6, we know the passage, but Matthew 18, verse 6, but whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, if our light is darkness, we can cause other ones, little ones in the faith, to sin. It would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. I would drown in the depth of the sea very quickly with that around my neck. Another thought with that, let's go to Revelation 18. When I think of that and I think of the millstone, and we think about our desire for Jesus Christ to return to this earth and turn it around and get rid of this system that's out there that is led by the god of this world. How does God remove this system? He removes this system in Revelation 18, verse 21. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it in the sea, saying, thus with violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down and shall not be found anymore. That's how God views what he's going to do with the whole Babylon system. And God's people, as we strive to make sure that our light is not darkness, we mirror that mindset of God, yearning so much for the time when this system will be thrown away like a millstone. Like a millstone. Okay, let's go to point number 2. The second, listen to me now and hear me later. Take heed. Let's go to Luke 8. Luke 8. Luke 8, verse 16, here we see the discussion again of the lamp. Luke 8, verse 16. No one, when he's lit a lamp, covers it with a vessel or puts it under a bed. He sets it on a lampstand, that those who enter may see the light. We have that role and responsibility as we live our lives in the world and as we live our lives in front of others within the faith and set that powerful example. For nothing is secret that will not be revealed. And in a good way, as Scripture talks about. A person who is living life in a good way, it will be revealed in time. Nor anything hidden that will not be known and come to light. It works in the positive and it works in the negative. If we're living a secret and all that, it's eventually going to come out. It's going to be. And if we're doing what's right, that's going to come out. But then he says the second take heed here in verse 18. Therefore, take heed how you hear. Do we take heed how we hear? And then he makes the statement, for whoever has, to him more will be given, and whoever does not have, even what he seems to have, or the margin says, even what he thinks he has, I don't have a lot, but what I think, at least I have this. Even what he thinks he has will be taken from him. Think about that. With respect to what we're discussing today. Let's go to, keep your finger there, let's go over to Mark 4 really quickly. Mark 4 brings out an extra element to this in verse 21. Mark 4, verse 21. Same statements are made here in verses 21 and 22. Now, Mark 4:23, he says, if anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. And then he said to them in verse 24, take heed what you hear. With the same measure you use it, it will be measured to you. And to you who hear, more will be given. So the same measure that we use what we've heard in how we hear, it's going to be measured back to us. For, as verse 25 says, for whoever has, more will be given. But whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. So why do we need to take heed to how we hear? Well, so we can learn with it. So we can learn with it with a noble and good heart to produce that fruit. Let's go back now to Luke 8 and see Christ explain that as we look at the parable of the sower. You've got all the different folks that are hearing, and it's by the wayside, and thorns come up in other situations. Birds come up and eat certain things because of the not taking heed of how they heard in that respect, as this analogy goes. He says, verse 12, by the wayside, Luke 8, verse 12, those who by the wayside, they hear it, but the devil comes and takes away the word out of their hearts, lest they should believe and be saved. The devil is involved. Verse 13, the ones on the rock, the ones that fell on the rock, the seed, well, they heard it with joy. I heard, but they don't have any root. They believe for a while, and then temptation takes them away, different temptations. We have temptations that threaten to take us away, and they fall away. Ones that fell among thorns, well, when they heard, they go out, but then these other things, the riches, the pleasures of life, different cares, and it just doesn't come to maturation. The fruit doesn't mature. But the ones, verse 15, that fell on the good ground are those who, having heard the word, they heard it with a noble and a good heart. Young people, are you hearing God's word? Are you reading God's word and applying God's word with a noble and good heart? It's here. I get it. I am trying to live this way because it is right. It is the light. I'm not the light. But God, as I take in of your light, as your Spirit works with me, you then cause that to reflect back to others. It's your goodness. I want to do that. Those who have that noble and good heart hear in that way, and they keep it, they keep that word, and they bear fruit, and they do it with endurance. It's not Johnny come lately, fly by night, I'm here and burn out, and then tomorrow I'm doing something else. Man, I'm really on fire for this right now, and then tomorrow, where'd he go? Where'd she go? No, it's They are in it for the long haul. This is right. This is of God. This is good stuff. I'm going to let it grab on and take root and bear fruit. You know, as we look at that, there's another element to this that it's important for us to understand. One is the manner in which God gives. I think it's fascinating that this is so contradictory to what we see out there in the world and the view that mankind has. It's very important to understand that to those that have, God gives more. And to those that don't, God takes away what little they have, and they even lose that. Well, where do we hear that in society? Well, that's not what we're supposed to do. But that's the way God views it. You think about it from the world perspective. Right now, the world has these things. They don't have what we have, but they think they have a little something. But what they even think they have, what's going to happen to it? It's all going to be taken away. The millstone of Babylon is going to get completely thrown, and it's all going to be gone. But in their plan, when they're called, they're going to be given, and they're going to have the chance to grow and give all of that. So God works with them in their time frame. What about for us, though? We've been given, and those of us that have been given and apply what we have been given and listen and hear and the measure with which we have heard and learned, it comes here with a noble heart, and we build that. God gives us more. Those of us that have it a little bit, but not much, but then we don't do anything with it, what ultimately happens? God takes it away. That's in a sense the same story as the person who buries the talent in the sand. We just can't. We're not going to get through this life in that manner. We know that, we understand that, but to apply it is such a critical aspect of what it is to be a follower of Jesus Christ. Let's examine ourselves in that area. Let's shore up those areas where that is not the case. Let's turn finally by going back to Luke 8 as we wrap this up today. One of the things that I often think about when I think about that latter part of what am I doing as a Christian? To what degree am I taking heed how I hear by the way I live my life? And one of the ways to determine that is to read through the Proverbs about the sloth, to read about the sluggard and how he is, the lazy, the bad examples. One of the stories states in Proverbs 24, you don't have to turn there, but he says, when I saw that sloth or that sluggard who did not do with what he was given, did not take advantage of that, he says, when I saw it, I considered it well. I looked on it and I received instruction. I learned from that. I'm not going to follow that path. I am going to be diligent in how I hear. Okay, so finally, we go then to Luke 8. So Christ has said this to not only, as we read earlier, to make sure that our light that we send out is not darkness, but also to take heed how we hear. He says this in Luke 8, verse 19. Because he says even what that individual thinks he has will be taken from him. So then we see what's going on next. Well, his mother and his brothers came to him, and they couldn't even get to Jesus, because the crowd was so massive that they couldn't even work their way up, to let him know, hey, we're here too. Your mother and your brothers are here. So it was told to him, and this makes sense, verse 20, that someone would say, oh, did you know that your mother is here, and also your brothers are here, Jesus? So they came up and they said that. Your mother and your brothers are standing outside, and they desire to see you. Notice what Christ said there. He said, but he answered and said to them, my mother and my brothers, when I look at it in terms of my family, the spiritual family, my mother and my brothers, as I look with you, as you look with me, and as we look, as Christ looks at us, his mother and brothers, he says, my mother and brothers are those who hear the word of God and do it. As we go forward as his family, may we take heed that the light which is in us is not darkness, and may we take heed how we hear.